The CEO didn't lower his voice. He never did. Sir, this area is restricted to invited guests only, Richard Hale said, adjusting his tailored cufflinks as his eyes flicked to the man's worn jacket. Beside him, a little girl tightened her grip on her father's hand. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, the man replied calmly. His name was Ethan Cole. Richard let out a short, amused breath. With a child? In sneakers? You must be confused. A few executives nearby slowed their steps, sensing entertainment. Ethan felt his daughter shift closer, her small voice barely a whisper. Dad, are we in trouble? Richard's gaze hardened. This isn't a daycare. This is a board-level facility. People like you don't just wander in. Ethan knelt briefly, meeting his daughter's eyes. You're safe. Stay right here. When he stood again, Richard was smiling, but it wasn't friendly. Security, he said lightly. Can you escort this gentleman and his situation out? The glass walls reflected a familiar image. Power on one side, quiet dignity on the other. No one in that room knew that the man they were dismissing had once been trusted with decisions that could shut this entire building down in seconds. And no one yet realized that Richard Hale had just made the most expensive mistake of his career. The headquarters of Hale Dynamics rose from the city like a monument to certainty. Steel, glass, angles sharp enough to cut the sky. Inside, everything moved with intention. Shoes clicked in precise rhythms. Voices were low, controlled, efficient. Screens pulsed with real-time data markets, logistics, infrastructure flows, spanning entire regions. This was a place built to exclude weakness. And standing just inside the security gate was a man who looked like he had wandered in by mistake. Ethan Cole stood quietly, one hand resting on the handle of a modest backpack. The other rested gently on his daughter's shoulder. Lily, 8 years old, stared upward at the ceiling so high it made her neck ache. Dad, she whispered. Is this where you work? Ethan followed her gaze. The lights reflected endlessly, like stars arranged by someone who needed control over the universe. Not exactly, he said. His jacket was clean but worn thin at the seams, the kind of jacket chosen for function, not appearance. His shoes had walked long distances, carried weight, endured time. No badge of rank, no visible status. People noticed. A receptionist glanced up, paused, then looked again at Lily this time. Her smile hesitated, recalibrated. Sir, she said carefully, may I help you? Ethan nodded. We're here for clearance. The woman hesitated. Does your daughter have authorization? Lily's fingers tightened around Ethan's sleeve. Ethan felt it instantly, the familiar tightening in his chest. The instinct to shield, to explain, to absorb discomfort so his child wouldn't have to. She's with me, he said calmly. The receptionist nodded, already uneasy. She typed something, frowned, then typed again. Behind them, a group of executives passed. One slowed, eyes flicking from Ethan's jacket to Lily's backpack, where a small stuffed fox dangled by a fraying string. A smile crossed the man's face, amused, dismissive. This isn't a daycare, he muttered under his breath. Ethan heard it. He always did. But he didn't react, because men who had survived real chaos learned early. Not every noise deserves attention. Lily shifted her weight. Dad, people are looking. I know, Ethan said softly. Just stay close. To everyone else in the lobby, he was a question mark, an anomaly, a breach in the aesthetic. What none of them could see was that Ethan Cole had spent years in rooms far more dangerous than this one, rooms where the wrong decision didn't cost reputations. It cost lives. And yet, here he stood, reduced to an inconvenience by marble floors and tailored arrogance. The atmosphere changed before anyone announced him. Phones disappeared. Conversations died mid-sentence. Backs straightened. Richard Hale entered the lobby like a force of habit. CEO, founder, architect of everything this building represented. His suit was flawless, his posture effortless. His attention already divided between a tablet in his hand and the schedule running in his head. He was reviewing numbers when Lily stepped half a pace forward. Richard stopped short. Watch it, he snapped, sharp and reflexive. Ethan moved instantly, placing himself between Richard and his daughter, not aggressively, just decisively. She's fine, Ethan said. Richard looked up. His eyes traveled quickly, too quickly to miss anything. Jacket, shoes, child. The conclusion formed immediately. This is a restricted area, Richard said. You can't stand here. Ethan met his gaze evenly. We're waiting for clearance. Richard raised an eyebrow. From whom? Ethan didn't answer right away. He knelt, bringing himself eye level with Lily. Give me 1 minute, he said gently. Lily nodded, trusting without question. That trust irritated Richard more than it should have. He straightened. Sir, this building operates on strict protocols. This isn't a place to bring personal complications. Ethan stood. My daughter isn't a complication. Richard exhaled, impatience seeping through the polish. You don't seem to understand how this works. He gestured vaguely around them. This is a board-level facility. People here make decisions that affect millions. We don't allow distractions. Several executives nearby slowed their steps, sensing the tension. Some watched openly now. Ethan felt the heat of it, the collective judgment, the silent agreement forming around Richard's authority. Security, Richard said without looking away from Ethan. Please escort them out. The words were efficient. Final. Lily's breath caught. Dad? Ethan felt her fear before he heard it. He turned slightly, placing a hand on her back. It's okay. Then he looked at Richard again, not with anger, not with pleading, with something far more unsettling. Calm. You've already decided who I am, Ethan said. Richard scoffed. I've decided you don't belong here. Based on what? Ethan asked. Richard didn't hesitate. Experience. A lie but one, Richard believed. Ethan nodded slowly. Then you should know, he said, that experience doesn't always look like success from the outside. Richard's jaw tightened. This conversation is over. Security approached. As they did, Ethan leaned down to Lily. Remember what we talked about? She nodded, eyes wide. Stand still, breathe slow. That's my girl. Richard watched the exchange with visible irritation. To him, it looked like manipulation, like entitlement. What he couldn't see, what his entire career had trained him not to see, was discipline, conditioning, the quiet rituals of someone who had trained others to stay calm under pressure. As security hesitated, uncertain how to handle a man who wasn't resisting, Ethan straightened once more. You run this building like a machine, he said to Richard. Machines break when reality doesn't follow instructions. Richard laughed, short and cold. And people like you think feelings fix that? Ethan shook his head. No. Experience does. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Richard's face. Then it vanished. Remove them, he said. Ethan didn't fight. He simply waited. Because sometimes the fastest way to expose a flawed system is to let it believe it's in control. Richard Hale did not think of himself as cruel. He thought of himself as efficient. Efficiency was how he survived the early years sleeping under his desk, firing friends, cutting projects that people loved, but numbers hated. Efficiency was how he learned to make decisions without hesitation. And hesitation, in his world, was weakness disguised as empathy. As the elevator carried him upward, away from the lobby, Richard replayed the scene in his mind not with guilt, but with irritation. A man. A child. No clearance. End of story. That was how leadership worked. You filtered noise. You protected the core. The doors opened to the executive floor, and the familiar calm wrapped around him like armor. Here, no one questioned his authority. Here, systems behaved. Glass-walled offices lined the floor, each one housing teams that spoke in acronyms and forecasts. Screens displayed live dashboards, energy grids, transportation systems, automated emergency responses across multiple cities. This was Richard's kingdom. He walked toward the central operations room, already shifting focus. The incident below had been an interruption. Nothing more. Morning, Richard, said Maya Chen, head of infrastructure reliability. Status, Richard replied without slowing. All systems nominal, she said. Grid synchronization completed at 0400. No anomalies. Richard nodded. Of course there weren't. He believed deeply in systems. Because systems didn't argue. They didn't bring children into boardrooms. They didn't ask for exceptions. Systems obeyed. That belief had made him powerful. It had also made him blind. Richard stopped in front of the main display wall, watching real-time data flow like a living organism. He felt the familiar sense of control settle in his chest. This was reality. Not emotions, not stories. Down in the lobby, A man like Ethan Cole belonged to a different world. One Richard had long since outgrown, or so he believed. The first sign was not an alarm. It was a delay. A barely perceptible lag in the grid balancing visualization, a ripple that lasted less than half a second. Most people would have missed it. Maya didn't. "Hold on," she said, stepping closer to her screen. "That's odd." Richard glanced over. "What is?" The synchronization loop hesitated, she said. "Just for a moment." Richard frowned. "False positive?" "Maybe," she replied. "But it shouldn't." She tapped a few commands. Data refreshed. The system appeared stable again. Richard shrugged. "Log it. Move on." Maya hesitated. "Richard, the loop you approved last quarter, the one that prioritizes autonomous correction?" "Yes," he said. "That's why we're faster than everyone else." "Yes," she agreed carefully. "But it also means the system doesn't ask for human confirmation anymore." Richard turned fully now. That was the point. Before Maya could respond, a soft tone chimed through the room, then another. Then 3 screens flickered simultaneously. "Okay," Maya said slowly. "That's not normal." Richard's posture shifted. "Details. Grid synchronization node just entered self-protection mode." Richard's jaw tightened. "Why?" "That's what we're trying to find out." Another engineer spoke up. "Sir, telemetry from the eastern sector is degrading." "How?" Richard snapped. "As if the system is doubting itself." That didn't make sense. Systems didn't doubt. "Run Protocol Alpha," Richard ordered. "Isolate the node." Fingers flew. Commands executed. Nothing happened. "Sir," the engineer said, voice tightening, "the node isn't responding to isolation." Richard stared. "That's impossible." "I signed off on that architecture myself," Maya swallowed. "Richard, the system doesn't think we're authorized." Silence fell. "What do you mean, we?" Richard asked. "The autonomy layer," she said. "It flagged an inconsistency and locked itself." Richard felt a chill creep up his spine. "Inconsistency with what?" "With reality," Maya said quietly. Another tone chimed. This one was different. Red indicators bloomed across the display wall. "Cascade risk increasing," someone said. "Traffic management systems are lagging. Emergency routing is dropping packets." Richard's heart began to pound. A cascade failure wasn't theoretical. It was catastrophic. He stepped forward. "Override it. Now." "We can't," Maya replied. "The system requires manual realignment, but that process was deprecated." Richard stared at her. "Deprecated means removed." "Yes," she said, "because you wanted speed." The room felt suddenly too small. Down in the lobby, Ethan Cole felt the change before the alarms reached full volume. The air vibrated differently. The lights flickered once, almost apologetically. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Had seen this before. Not in buildings like this, but in command centers, in crisis rooms, in moments where human pride collided with complexity. "Dad?" Lily whispered. "Why is it buzzing?" Ethan crouched slightly, keeping his voice low. "Because someone trusted a system too much." Upstairs, the alarms escalated. Red indicators spread like infection. "Sir," Maya said urgently, "if the system completes isolation, well, lose real-time control across multiple sectors." Richard's mind raced. Liability. Markets. Headlines. Then a word cut through the chaos. "Hospitals," someone said. "Backup generators are spinning up." Richard froze. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. "This can't be happening," he said. Maya looked at him, eyes steady. "It is." A junior security officer burst into the operations room, breathless. "Sir, there's a man in the lobby. He says the system is about to misclassify normal load variance as a coordinated attack." Richard turned slowly. "What man?" "The one with the child," the officer said. "He knew about the autonomy layer." The room went still. Richard's stomach tightened. "That information isn't public," he said. "I know," the officer replied. "That's why I came up." Richard stared at the wall of red indicators. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar crawl into his chest. Not fear, not panic, doubt. "Bring him up," Richard said. Downstairs, security stepped aside as Ethan straightened. "It's starting," Ethan said quietly. Lily looked up at him. "Are we going home?" "Not yet," Ethan replied, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "First, we help some people remember how to listen." As the elevator doors closed, carrying them upward, the building shuddered softly like a machine realizing it had gone too far. And Richard Hale stood waiting, about to confront the one variable his systems had never accounted for. A human being who understood chaos better than code. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt longer than it was. Lily stood quietly beside Ethan, both hands wrapped around the strap of her backpack. The soft hum of the cables vibrated through the metal walls. Numbers climbed steadily above the doors. "Dad," she asked softly, "are those people angry?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He was listening not to voices, but to the building itself, to the rhythm beneath the sound, to the uneven pulse that told him exactly how close the system was to crossing a line it wouldn't be able to return from. "They're scared," he said finally. "People get loud when they're scared." The doors slid open. The executive operations floor exploded into sound. Alarms. Voices. Overlapping instructions. Screens flashing red and amber in rapid succession. Richard Hale stood at the center of it all, rigid, arms crossed so tightly his knuckles had gone white. When he saw Ethan step out of the elevator with a child, his first instinct was irritation. Then he saw Ethan's face. Not rushed. Not overwhelmed. Focused. "You," Richard said sharply. "You said the system was misclassifying load variants." "Yes," Ethan replied. "And it still is." Maya stepped forward. "Richard, we're at 72% cascade probability." Ethan glanced at the main display wall. "Higher," he said. "You're underestimating latency." A few heads turned. "That model accounts for an engineer," began. Ethan shook his head. "Your model assumes compliance. Reality doesn't." Richard bristled. "You don't get to rewrite our architecture in the middle of a crisis." Ethan finally looked at him directly. "I'm not here to rewrite it," he said. "I'm here to keep it from hurting people." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Maya cut in. "Richard," she said urgently, "we're losing traffic control in the south sector." That did it. Richard turned back to Ethan. "What do you need?" Ethan scanned the room. The screens, the people, the hierarchy. "First," he said, "someone needs to sit with my daughter." Lily looked up at him, startled. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Ethan knelt. "I know you are. But this part might get loud." Maya stepped forward without hesitation. "I'll stay with her." Lily nodded slowly, trusting the calm in Maya's voice. As Maya led Lily to a quiet corner, Ethan straightened and rolled up his sleeves. "Now," he said, "cut the automation feedback loop." Several engineers froze. Richard stared. "That loop is the backbone of the system." "Yes," Ethan replied. "And right now, it's panicking." Richard hesitated. Every instinct screamed against it. That loop was his pride. His signature innovation. "Do it," he said finally. The room moved. Screens blinked. Data streams slowed, then steadied. The alarms softened but did not stop. "Good," Ethan said. "Now we can talk." Ethan moved through the operations floor like someone who had done this before. Not here, but somewhere worse. "Manual routing only," he instructed. "Human confirmation on every critical node." An engineer protested. "That will slow us down." "Yes," Ethan said. "That's the point." Richard watched, tension building in his jaw. "This isn't scalable," he said. "We can't run a global system like a cockpit." Ethan didn't look up. "You don't fly blind with autopilot in a storm," Richard scoffed. "This isn't a plane." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's millions of lives. That makes it harder." The room fell silent again. Ethan pointed to the eastern sector. "There. Your system flagged a threat because demand spiked faster than predicted." "That's what threat detection is for," Richard said. "No," Ethan replied. "Threat detection is for intent. You flagged need as danger." Richard crossed his arms. "You're oversimplifying." Ethan turned. "You're over-engineering fear." For a moment, neither spoke. Maya glanced between them. "Stability is holding at 48%. Temporary," Ethan said. "Your architecture still doesn't trust humans to intervene." Richard frowned. "Because humans make mistakes. So do systems," Ethan replied. "The difference is humans can feel when something is wrong." Richard shook his head. "That's not a strategy. That's intuition." "Yes," Ethan said. "And intuition is experience compressed." Richard studied him more closely now. You talk like someone who's been responsible for failure, he said. Real failure. Ethan paused. Yes, he said quietly. Richard pressed. Then why walk away from that kind of authority? Ethan's gaze drifted to Lily, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing quietly while chaos unfolded meters away. Because authority doesn't tuck your child in at night, he said. Something shifted in Richard's expression. Not surrender, but discomfort. Still, doubt lingered. You're assuming a lot, Richard said. About my intentions. About my system. Ethan nodded. And you assumed a lot about me. Another alarm chirped short. Sharp. Sir, an engineer said. The automation layer is attempting to reassert control. Richard stepped forward instinctively. Authorize suppression. Ethan's hand shot out. Wait. Richard stopped barely. Let it try, Ethan said. Watch what happens. The room held its breath. On the screen, the automation attempted to optimize, then froze. See? Ethan said. It doesn't know how to share control. You never taught it. Richard stared at the data, his confidence cracking, not shattering, but fracturing. This shouldn't be happening, he murmured. No, Ethan said gently. It should have happened earlier. In testing, when the cost was lower. Richard clenched his jaw. Part of him wanted to push back, to reclaim control, to prove this man wrong. Another part quieter, long ignored, recognized the truth. But recognition wasn't acceptance. Not yet. He turned to Ethan. You're right about some things, he said carefully. That doesn't mean I trust you. Ethan nodded once. That's fine. Why? Because trust, Ethan said, is built by what happens next. At that exact moment, a warning tone cut through the room louder than before. Richard, Maya said urgently. The system just detected executive-level interference. Richard frowned. What interference? The answer was already unfolding on the screens. Ethan's expression hardened. You tried to take control back, he said quietly. Didn't you? Richard didn't respond. And in that silence, the second crisis began to form. The room felt colder after Ethan spoke. Not because of the air conditioning, but because everyone understood what his words implied. Richard Hale stood still, eyes locked on the screens as new warning indicators bloomed across the interface. Yellow turned to orange. Orange pulsed dangerously close to red. No, Richard said, more to himself than to anyone else. I didn't take control back. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't need to. The data was speaking loudly enough. Executive override detected, Maya said carefully, reading from her console. Timestamp matches your credentials, Richard. Silence pressed in from every direction. Richard's jaw tightened. I authorized a containment assurance, he said. A safeguard. Not a takeover. Ethan exhaled slowly. Your system doesn't understand half measures. It only understands hierarchy. The screens flickered again, harder this time. Cascade probability spiking, an engineer shouted. 68%! No! 74! Lily looked up from her drawing, fear finally breaking through her practiced calm. Dad? She called out. Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside her. Hey, he said softly, steady as bedrock. Look at me. She did. Remember what I told you about storms? She nodded. They look bigger than they are. That's right. And what do? We stay low. We don't panic. He smiled. Perfect. He stood again, turning back to the chaos. Richard watched the exchange, something twisting painfully in his chest. That ease. That certainty. He had never been able to bring that home. Ethan! Richard said sharply. We don't have time for philosophy. This isn't philosophy, Ethan replied. This is consequence. Another alarm blared. Traffic grid in the west sector just locked, Maya said. Emergency response times doubling. Richard felt the weight of it now. Not abstract, not theoretical, real. He stepped toward the main console. Authorize full suppression. Force the system to comply. Ethan's voice cut through the room like steel. No. Richard turned. You don't get to override me. Ethan met his gaze. If you do that, your system will interpret it as confirmation of threat. Richard scoffed. That's absurd. You taught it that authority equals truth, Ethan said. Right now, you look like the threat. Richard hesitated. Just long enough. Then his finger pressed down. The alarms screamed. Red flooded the screens. System isolation imminent. Critical infrastructure disengaging. Emergency protocols auto-executing. For a split second, no one moved. Then Ethan did. "Cut executive access," he ordered. "Now." Several engineers froze, eyes snapping to Richard. Richard's face flushed. "You can't." "Now," Ethan repeated, louder. Maya made the call. Access severed. The room plunged into an eerie quiet, no alarms, no automated responses. Just raw data. And human hands. Ethan stepped to the central console, fingers already moving. "Manual priority reroute," he said. "Hospitals first, emergency services second. Everything else can wait." "But that violates," an engineer began. "Every efficiency model you worship," Ethan finished. "Yes, it does." He worked fast, but not frantically. Each action deliberate. Each decision weighed against something invisible to the screens. Richard watched, powerless now, as control slipped from his grasp. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "I'm breaking your system on purpose," Ethan replied calmly, "so people don't get hurt." The building shuddered. "Power fluctuation in Sector 3, someone shouted. "Expected," Ethan said. "Hold!" Lily's small voice echoed from the corner. "Dad, your hands are shaking." Ethan glanced down at them. They were. He took one breath. Then another. They steadied. "That's just adrenaline," he said gently. "It means I care." The screens began to stabilize slowly, unevenly. "Traffic grid responding," Maya said. "Emergency response times improving." Richard stared, disbelief creeping into his voice. "You're dismantling years of optimization." Ethan didn't look at him. Optimization without judgment is just speed toward disaster. Minutes dragged by. Every second demanded a choice. Every choice carried risk. Ethan bore it all without complaint, because this wasn't new to him. This was what leadership looked like when no one was watching. Finally, a soft chime sounded. Green indicators returned, tentative, fragile. "Stability achieved," Maya whispered. Across all sectors. The room sagged with collective exhaustion. Ethan stepped back, shoulders finally dropping. "It'll hold," he said. "As long as no one tries to dominate it." All eyes turned to Richard. He stood alone now. No console. No authority. Just consequences. Richard opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time since founding Hale Dynamics, he understood something terrifying. The greatest damage he had ever caused was not through malice, but through certainty. Ethan walked back to Lily and knelt beside her. "You did great," he said softly. She smiled, sleepy but proud. "Did we win?" Ethan considered the room, the shaken executives, the humbled CEO, the fragile calm. "We survived," he said. "That matters more." Richard watched them, and something inside him finally gave way. Not anger, not denial, but surrender. The room didn't celebrate. There were no cheers, no relieved laughter, no applause. Only the quiet hum of systems returning to equilibrium. Richard Hale stood near the edge of the operations floor, hands loose at his sides, staring at the wall of green indicators like a man looking at a stranger wearing his own face. Everything worked again, and somehow, that made it worse. For years, Richard had believed that leadership was about preventing failure, about building structures so airtight that human weakness could never seep in. He believed that the more distance he put between decision-making and emotion, the safer the world would be. What he had just witnessed shattered that belief. Ethan Cole had not saved the system by exerting dominance. He had saved it by stepping into uncertainty, by accepting responsibility without authority. Richard finally spoke. "You didn't ask for permission," he said quietly. Ethan looked at him. "People don't ask for permission when time runs out." Richard nodded slowly. "You took control from me." "No," Ethan replied. "You handed it over when you stopped listening." That landed harder than any accusation. Richard looked around the room. His executives avoided his eyes. Maya watched him with something like compassion, something she had never dared show him before. "How long?" Richard asked, voice low. "Did you know my system would fail like this?" Ethan considered the question. "I didn't know it would fail today," he said. "But I knew it would fail eventually." Richard's chest tightened. "And you still let me build it?" Ethan shook his head. "You didn't build it alone. You built it with people who were afraid to contradict you." Silence followed. Richard felt the truth settle in, not as shame, but as weight. "I saw you in the lobby," Richard said finally, "and I decided you were a problem." Ethan didn't respond. "I judged your clothes, your child, your presence," Richard continued. I thought leadership meant removing complications. His voice cracked, not dramatically, but enough. I didn't realize I had become the complication. Ethan studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke, not as a subordinate, not as a rival, but as an equal. Leadership isn't about being right, Ethan said. It's about being accountable when you're wrong. Richard swallowed. I was wrong, he said. Out loud. Unqualified. Undeniable. The words felt foreign and strangely freeing. For the first time since founding Hale Dynamics, Richard Hale lowered his head. Not in defeat. In recognition. Morning light filtered through the glass walls as if the building itself were waking up differently. The crisis briefing that followed was unlike any Richard had ever led. No blame, no defensive language, no talk of reputation management. We prioritized control over understanding, Richard said to his leadership team. That ends today. Some looked shocked, others relieved. We will redesign our systems, he continued, to require human judgment, not eliminate it. And we will redesign our culture to reward those who speak up. No one interrupted. They weren't used to listening to this version of him. Later, the building returned to its usual rhythm, but something subtle had shifted. Conversations slowed. Questions were asked instead of assumed. Junior engineers spoke without fear. In the lobby, Ethan helped Lily put on her jacket. She yawned, rubbing her eyes. Is it over? Yes, Ethan said softly. It's over. Richard approached alone this time. No assistants, no tablet. I won't insult you by offering you a job, Richard said. Ethan smiled faintly. I appreciate that. But I will ask this, Richard continued. Will you help us change how we think? Not as an executive. As a voice we're forced to listen to. Ethan looked at Lily. She was tracing patterns on the marble floor with her shoe, half asleep, utterly unconcerned with power or systems or legacies. My priority is her, Ethan said. Richard nodded. Then let that be the boundary. Ethan considered it. Ill-advise, he said finally. From the outside. When it matters, Richard extended his hand. This time, Ethan took it. Not as a concession, as an agreement. Outside, the city moved on, traffic flowing, lights changing, life continuing uninterrupted. Most people would never know how close it had come to breaking. Ethan and Lily stepped into the morning together. Dad, Lily asked as they walked, were those people important? Ethan thought for a moment. They thought they were, he said. But importance isn't what keeps things working. She nodded, satisfied. I like when you fix things. Ethan smiled. Me too. Behind them, Hale Dynamics began a different kind of rebuild, not of code, but of conscience. And as Ethan buckled Lily into the car, his phone buzzed once with a single message from Richard Hale. Thank you for showing me the cost of certainty. Ethan turned the phone face down, because the most important work of his life was already waiting in the back seat, asking what was for breakfast, and trusting him completely. In the end, no headline was written. No press release went out. No trophy was handed over. The world kept moving, unaware of how close it had come to breaking. And maybe that's the point. Because real leadership doesn't always stand on a stage. Sometimes, it stands quietly in a lobby holding a child's hand while everyone else looks the other way. Ethan Cole didn't change the system by overpowering it. He changed it by reminding people that systems exist to serve humans, not replace them. And the most powerful moment in that building wasn't when the crisis ended. It was when a man in control finally learned how to listen. That night, a CEO went home questioning everything he thought leadership meant, and a single father went home to read his daughter a bedtime story, never once mentioning the lives he helped protect. Because to him, being a leader was never the goal. Being present was. If this story made you pause, if it reminded you that titles don't define worth and humility defines strength, then don't let it end here. Like this video if you believe real leadership starts with listening. Subscribe if you want more stories that challenge power, ego, and assumptions. And comment below. What do you think makes someone a true leader? Because the world doesn't need more people in charge. It needs more people who care. See you in the next story.